You're not tired because life is hard. You're tired because you're pretending, and the version of you everyone knows isn't the real one. You learned very early how to be acceptable, how to read the room, adjust your tone, hide certain instincts, exaggerate others. You were rewarded for it, attention, approval, belonging. So you kept going and going and going until one day you woke up successful, functional, even admired, and quietly empty. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never say out loud. The life you're living might not be yours. It might be the life your persona built to survive. As Carl Jung warned us, the persona is what one is not, but what oneself as well as others think one is. That means the very identity you protect could be the thing suffocating you, and the exhaustion you feel isn't weakness, it's a signal. This video isn't about self-improvement, it's about self-recovery, about recognizing how the mask slowly replaced the face, how approval became more important than authenticity, and why the pain you've been trying to silence is actually guiding you back to yourself. There is a way out, and it doesn't require burning your life down. It starts with seeing the mask clearly and realizing you were never meant to live inside it. You didn't put the mask on for fun, you put it on to survive. Somewhere early on, you learned that being yourself came with a cost. So you adjusted, softened edges, hid instincts, edited your identity. The persona became your passport, your way into rooms that felt unsafe without it. At first it felt smart, even necessary, but here's the quiet truth most people avoid. The mask was never the face. It was a tool, not the self. And tools, when worn too long, start shaping the hand that holds them. That's where the confusion begins. That's where the real story starts to crack open. Think of it like armor you forgot to take off after the battle ended. Armor keeps you alive, but it also keeps you from being touched. Over time, you stop noticing the weight, yet your body does. Your exhaustion, your irritability, that vague sense of something's off, that's not weakness, that's misalignment. Your ego says, this is who you are now. But deeper down, the self whispers, this is who you learned to be. There's a big difference, and it matters more than you think, because what isn't you will eventually drain you, and it always sends a signal. You can see this in everyday life if you look closely. The friend who's always easygoing but secretly resentful. The professional who looks successful yet feels empty driving home. The one who's liked by everyone but known by no one. That's conformity doing its quiet damage. The persona earns approval, but it charges interest, and the payment is authenticity. Every time you silence your truth to keep the peace, the shadow grows, not evil, just unheard, waiting. Here's something most people won't tell you. Fear isn't the enemy here. Fear is just the guard at the door of awakening. It shows up when the old identity starts to loosen. When you think about saying no, setting a boundary, telling the truth, your heart speeds up, not because it's wrong, but because it's real. This is where individuation begins, quietly, internally. No applause, no announcement, just a subtle rebellion against who you were told to be. A moment where you choose honesty over harmony and feel both terrified and alive. If you want something practical, start small, almost boringly small. Notice when you say, I'm fine, but aren't. Notice when you agree too fast, laugh too quickly, explain too much. That's the mask adjusting itself in real time. You don't need to rip it off, just loosen it. Read something that challenges your self-image, like Man's Search for Meaning or The Courage to be Disliked. Journal one uncensored page a day, no audience, no performance. That's how the real self starts breathing again. And once it does, a deeper question naturally rises. Because if this isn't your face, whose life have you been living? Did you like this first topic, or would you like me to adjust something? Tone, depth, pacing, or even expand it further? At some point, you figured out what worked, and you stuck with it. Maybe being quiet kept you safe. Maybe being funny made people stay. Maybe being strong meant no one asked questions you couldn't answer. That wasn't weakness. That was intelligence. You read the room, adapted, and survived. The persona wasn't fake. It was functional. But here's the thing most people never revisit. Strategies expire. What saves you at 10 can suffocate you at 30. And still, you keep playing the same move. The danger isn't that the persona exists. The danger is mistaking it for identity. A coat keeps you warm in winter, but you don't sleep in it forever. Yet many people do exactly that with their persona. They wake up already performing. They confuse consistency with authenticity. The ego loves this. It thrives on predictability, but the self craves truth, even when it's messy. That tension you feel lately isn't random. It's growth knocking, politely at first. Look around and you'll see it everywhere. The responsible one who can't rest without guilt. The strong one who never asks for help and feels invisible. The nice one who's slowly burning with resentment. These are not personalities, they're survival roles. And roles are heavy when you never leave the stage. You keep saying yes, not because you want to, but because that's who you've been. The mask becomes muscle memory, and changing feels like betrayal to others and to yourself. That's where fear tightens its grip. Here's the twist. Clarity often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. When you stop performing, some people get uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because the agreement changed. The persona was a contract. I'll be this, you'll approve. Breaking it feels risky, even selfish, but individuation always does. Growth never asks for permission. It asks for honesty. And honesty often arrives disguised as discomfort. That's the toll booth on the road forward. If you want to test this without blowing up your life, try this experiment. Pick one low-stakes moment each day and respond slower. Don't default to the automatic yes or the rehearsed smile. Pause. Feel what you actually think. Then answer from there, even if it's awkward. Read The Untethered Soul or No More Mr. Nice Guy to spot these patterns clearly. Notice how your body reacts when you don't perform. That reaction is data, not danger, because once you see the persona as a strategy, not a truth, you start wondering what else you've mistaken for just who I am. Did this topic land the way you wanted? Or do you want any adjustments, more examples, sharper metaphors, or a different emotional intensity? When the noise dies down, something uncomfortable shows up. No roles to play, no one to impress, no feedback loop, just you, unfiltered, unsupervised, and a little unfamiliar. That's why silence scares people more than chaos. Because in quiet moments, the persona has nothing to do. And without the mask, you're left with a question you can't outsource. Not who should I be, but who am I when I'm not performing? Most people avoid that question their entire lives. They stay busy, connected, distracted. Anything to keep the spotlight on. Notice how often you reach for stimulation when you're alone. The phone, the noise, the endless scroll. It's not boredom you're avoiding, it's exposure. Silence is a mirror. And mirrors don't negotiate. They reflect what's there, not what you'd prefer. In those moments, the shadow starts clearing its throat. Not to attack you, but to be acknowledged. The parts you hid to be accepted still want a seat at the table, and the longer they're ignored, the louder they become. That's not pathology, it's psychology. Think of it like a house that's always full of guests. You know which rooms look good and which doors stay locked. When everyone leaves, the quiet rooms start calling your name. You realize how much energy went into hosting, smiling, explaining, managing impressions. Alone, there's no reward for being impressive, only relief or discomfort, depending on how honest you've been. This is where authenticity either strengthens or collapses, because solitude doesn't create truth, it reveals it. Here's a practical way to work with this instead of running from it. Schedule intentional solitude, not isolation, just presence. A walk without headphones, 10 minutes sitting with a notebook, no agenda. Write the sentence, "When no one is watching, I want," and finish it honestly. Don't censor it, don't judge it. Read authors who explored this territory like Thoreau or Jung himself. Notice what excites you when there's no applause. That's not random. That's signal, and signals point somewhere. At first this can feel unsettling, even lonely. That's normal. You're meeting parts of yourself that never got airtime. The ego resists because it thrives on reflection from others. But the self grows in private. This is where real awakening quietly takes root, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in small recognitions, moments where you catch yourself thinking, "Oh, there you are." And once you start recognizing yourself in the quiet, something shifts. You become less dependent on approval, which sets the stage for a deep attention, because if you know who you are, why are you still paying the price to be liked? Did you like this topic as it is, or would you like me to tweak the tone, add more practical exercises, or deepen a specific metaphor? Being liked feels safe, it feels warm, it feels like belonging. But there's a hidden invoice attached, and most people never read the fine print. Every time you choose approval over honesty, you pay a small fee. You call it being polite, flexible, understanding, but over time, those fees compound. You start editing your opinions, softening your boundaries, shrinking your needs. Not because you're weak, because you're strategic. You learned that harmony keeps doors open. What no one told you is that it also closes inner rooms, and eventually, you can't access yourself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Liking is conditional, love is not. Liking depends on performance, on staying predictable, agreeable, easy to manage. The persona knows this and works overtime to keep the peace, but the self keeps a ledger. It remembers every swallowed no, every unspoken truth. That's why resentment doesn't explode. It leaks in sarcasm, in fatigue, in a vague sense of being unseen. You're surrounded by people, yet strangely alone. That's the price tag showing up. You can spot this pattern in real life everywhere. The employee who's indispensable but never promoted. The friend who's always available but never truly supported. The partner who avoids conflict and slowly disappears. They're not failing at relationships, they're overpaying for acceptance. The ego says, if they like me, I'm safe. But safety bought this way is fragile. One boundary, one honest sentence, and it wobbles. That fear you feel before speaking up, that's the cost center flashing red. Let's reframe this with a simple metaphor. Imagine renting a house where you're not allowed to move the furniture. At first, it's fine. It's clean, it works, people approve. But years later, it still doesn't feel like home. You hesitate before hanging a picture. You ask permission to rest. That's what living for approval does to your inner world. You become a guest in your own life. And the longer you stay, the harder it is to remember you're allowed to rearrange things. This is where conformity quietly steals agency. If you want something practical, try this shift. Trade being liked for being clear, not rude, not reckless, just clear. Start with low-risk honesty, preferences, not proclamations. I'd rather rest tonight. That doesn't work for me. Watch what happens in your body first, not in their reaction. Read boundaries or essentialism to recalibrate this instinct. Notice who respects clarity and who only liked the performance. That information is gold. Because once you see the cost of being liked, you start noticing what grows in the shadow when you keep paying it. Did this one hit the mark, or do you want any adjustments? Stronger edge, more examples, or a different emotional tempo? Every smile you force leaves something behind, not outside, inside. The shadow isn't some dark villain lurking in you. It's unfinished business. It's the anger you learned wasn't nice. The ambition you were told was too much. The sadness that made others uncomfortable. So you packed it away, neatly, responsibly, and the persona smiled on cue. But what you repress doesn't disappear. It relocates, usually right behind the grin. Think of the shadow like steam in a sealed room. At first, it's invisible. Then the pressure builds. You snap over small things. You feel irritated for no clear reason. You judge in others what you refuse to admit in yourself. That's not you being broken. That's energy with nowhere to go. The ego tries to stay clean and acceptable. The shadow carries everything messy, powerful, human. And it's patient. You can see this dynamic play out in daily life. The calm person who explodes once a year. The moral one obsessed with others' flaws. The selfless one who secretly fantasizes about disappearing. These aren't contradictions, they're compensations. The psyche always seeks balance. If authenticity is blocked on the surface, it resurfaces underground. That's why ignoring the shadow doesn't make you good. It makes you predictable, and sometimes dangerous to yourself. Here's the shift most people miss. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting it out. It means listening before it screams. Ask yourself, what am I not allowing myself to feel? Jealousy might be pointing to desire. Anger might be guarding a boundary. Even laziness can be grief in disguise. When you name these honestly, they soften. Read Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson to understand this terrain without fear. The shadow loses its grip when it's invited into consciousness. Light doesn't destroy it, it educates it. Try something practical tonight. Write a list titled, Traits I Judge in Others. Then, next to each one, write how it might live quietly in you. Not as blame, just curiosity. This isn't about guilt, it's about wholeness. Because the goal isn't to be good, it's to be real. And real people are complex, contradictory, alive. Once you stop using the smile as a hiding place, something surprising happens. You feel more grounded, less reactive, and that sets up the next realization. Because if parts of you were hidden for survival, how many roles have you mistaken for your true identity? Did you like this topic? Or would you like me to adjust the intensity, add more real-life examples, or expand the practical exercise? At some point you stopped saying, I do this, and started saying, I am this. Not consciously, subtly. You became the role because the role rewarded you. The responsible one, the achiever, the caretaker, the rebel. Roles come with scripts, and scripts reduce uncertainty. They tell you how to act, what's expected, where you belong. The persona loves that clarity. But the self doesn't fit neatly into job descriptions, and when the role cracks, so do you. That's when the panic feels personal. Here's the trap. Roles are useful, but they're temporary. They're costumes, not skin. Yet most people defend them like their life depends on it. Lose the job, and identity wobbles. End the relationship, and the mirror goes blank. Retire, and suddenly time feels terrifying. That's not because you're weak. It's because the role was doing the remembering for you. The ego stitched worth into function. So when function disappears, worth seems to vanish with it. But that was never true. Look at how often people introduce themselves by what they do, not what they value, not what they're becoming, just the role they currently occupy. It's efficient, but shallow. Roles are externally defined. Identity is internally felt. One can be taken away, the other can only be abandoned. That's why conformity feels safer than freedom. Freedom asks, who are you without the label? And that question has no script. A helpful metaphor here is the stage. Roles are characters you play under certain lights. They matter, but only during the scene. When the curtain falls, you don't stay in costume forever, unless you forget the play ended. Many people do. They keep acting even when no one's watching. That's why rest feels guilty and stillness feels threatening. Because without action, the role has nothing to prove, and the ego gets nervous. Try a small, grounding practice this week. When you catch yourself saying, I am, followed by a role, pause. Replace it with, Right now, I'm playing the role of... Notice how your body responds. That tiny linguistic shift loosens the grip of identity. Read The Second Mountain or Man's Search for Meaning again with this lens. Notice what remains when roles dissolve. There's something quieter, steadier, more resilient there. And once you feel it, a new fear emerges, not of losing roles, but of being truly seen without them. Did this topic work for you as is, or would you like changes? More humor, sharper examples, or deeper psychological framing? You don't really fear rejection. That's the story you tell yourself because it sounds reasonable. What you actually fear is exposure, being seen without the armor, because rejection hurts, sure, but exposure threatens identity. It risks revealing that the persona isn't the whole story, that beneath the polish there's uncertainty, desire, contradiction. And once that's seen, it can't be unseen. The ego prefers predictable pain over uncertain truth. At least rejection keeps the mask intact. Being seen feels dangerous because it removes control. When you perform, you curate. When you're authentic, you risk misunderstanding. People might not get you, they might project, judge, or walk away. So you stay legible instead of real. You explain yourself in advance. You soften statements, add disclaimers, overqualify your truth. Not to deceive, but to manage perception. That's fear wearing a polite suit. You can notice this fear in subtle moments, when you hesitate before sharing an idea, when you downplay something you care about, when you say it's not a big deal, even though it is. That's the moment being seen knocks, and the persona answers instead. Because being seen means being known, and being known means you can no longer hide behind potential. You have to stand in what you actually are. For many people, that feels heavier than loneliness, so they choose invisibility in plain sight. Here's a metaphor that clarifies this. Imagine living your whole life behind frosted glass. People can see your outline, your movement, your usefulness, but not your face. Being seen means stepping into clear glass. Some will like what they see, some won't. But either way, you're finally real. The shadow relaxes when honesty enters the room, because it was never asking for approval, just acknowledgement. If you want to practice this safely, start with selective visibility. Choose one trusted context and remove one layer of performance. Share a thought you'd normally keep polished. Express a preference without justifying it. Create something imperfect and let it exist. Write, speak, post, build. Read Daring Greatly by Brené Brown to normalize this discomfort. Notice this: fear spikes before exposure, then drops quickly after. The body learns that visibility isn't fatal, and once you taste that relief, a deeper realization surfaces. Because if being seen is possible, why did you ever agree to hide in the first place? Did you like this topic? Or do you want me to adjust the emotional depth, add stronger examples, or sharpen the practical exercise? You didn't invent the mask alone. You inherited it. Long before you chose consciously, you learned the rules by watching. What gets praised, what gets punished, what gets ignored. Society doesn't sit you down and explain the deal. It teaches by reward and withdrawal. Smile here. Succeed there. Don't feel that. Don't say this. Slowly, quietly, you sign a contract you never read. I'll be acceptable. You'll let me belong. The persona isn't personal. It's cultural. And that's why it feels so hard to drop. This is how conformity disguises itself as common sense. You're told it's just how things are. Be productive, be positive, be busy. Grief gets a time limit. Anger needs a reason. Depth is fine, as long as it doesn't slow anyone down. So you adapt, not because you're fake, but because you're human. Belonging is wired into the nervous system. Exile once meant death. Your body still remembers that. That's why the ego obeys before you even think. Look at how often people confuse normal with healthy. Burnout is common, so it's called ambition. Emotional numbness is widespread, so it's called strength. Disconnection is shared, so it's called independence. When everyone is wearing a mask, the unmasked feels strange, awkward, intense, too much. That's how the collective keeps itself stable, not by truth but by agreement. And agreements feel invisible until you challenge them. That's when the friction starts. Here's a metaphor to ground this. Imagine a fish trying to describe water. It's everywhere, so it feels like nothing. Culture works the same way. You don't notice it shaping you until you swim differently, until you rest when others hustle, until you speak honestly when others perform. Suddenly, you're different, not wrong, just off script, and the system reacts not out of malice, but reflex, because your authenticity disrupts the agreement. If you want a practical way to loosen this grip, start observing instead of obeying. Notice which behaviors get rewarded in your environment. Ask yourself, does this align with my values or just my conditioning? Consume ideas outside your usual bubble, philosophy, psychology, long-form conversation. Read Civilized to Death by Christopher Ryan, or revisit Jung's work on the collective unconscious with fresh eyes. Practice choosing one value-aligned action a day, even if it's quiet and unseen. This isn't rebellion, it's discernment. And discernment slowly rewrites the contract, because once you see the persona as a collective agreement, you begin to sense how much freedom exists beyond it. Did this topic feel right to you, or would you like me to adjust the framing, add sharper cultural examples, or deepen the practical side? Pain isn't here to punish you, it's here to get your attention. But you were taught early to silence it, manage it, outperform it. So when discomfort shows up, you assume something's wrong with you. You try to fix it fast, numb it, distract from it. Yet pain is often the most honest language the self has. It speaks when words fail. It shows up when alignment is lost. That tight chest, that chronic fatigue, that low-grade sadness, they're not flaws in the system. They're notifications you've been ignoring. Think of pain like a dashboard light in a car. Covering it doesn't fix the engine. You can keep driving, sure, but at a cost. Most people do exactly that emotionally. They function, perform, achieve, smile. Meanwhile, something inside is overheating. Burnout isn't laziness. Anxiety isn't weakness. Numbness isn't peace. They're signals that the persona has been driving too long. You can see this pattern clearly in everyday moments. You wake up tired, even after sleep. You dread things you're supposed to enjoy. You fantasize about escape more than growth. That's not a motivation problem, it's misalignment. The self is pulling the emergency brake, saying, this isn't working anymore. But the ego argues back with logic, obligations, expectations. So the pain gets louder, because it has to. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Pain is data. Not an order to quit, but an invitation to listen. Ask better questions instead of harsher ones. Not, what's wrong with me, but what am I betraying? Often, pain points to truth you've postponed. A boundary you didn't set, a desire you minimized, a life path you stayed on out of fear, not meaning. When you follow the signal, the pain often softens because it's finally been heard. Try this practical shift the next time discomfort shows up. Pause before numbing it with noise, work, or scrolling. Name it specifically: physical, emotional, existential. Then ask, what change is this asking for? Write the answer without editing. Read When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate to understand how often pain carries wisdom. Take one small corrective action. Rest, honesty, simplification. Not a grand overhaul, just alignment in inches. Pain doesn't disappear overnight, but it becomes cooperative. And once you stop treating pain as the enemy, you're ready for the most difficult step of all, choosing yourself, even when it looks like disobedience. Did you like this topic, or would you like me to adjust the emotional weight, add more concrete examples, or expand the practical guidance? At some point, growth asks you to disappoint someone, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. You feel it when the old rules stop making sense. When obedience feels heavier than risk, this is where individuation actually begins, not with self-help slogans, but with friction, because becoming yourself means stepping out of line somewhere. The persona wants permission, the self moves anyway. Disobedience isn't rebellion for attention, it's alignment with truth, and truth doesn't ask to be liked. This kind of disobedience is subtle but unsettling. You stop explaining yourself so much. You make choices that don't fit the narrative others wrote for you. You rest when hustle is expected. You say no without a speech. Nothing about this looks heroic from the outside. In fact, it can look selfish, confusing, even disappointing. But internally, something relaxes. Energy returns. Breath deepens. That's the nervous system recognizing integrity. Here's the paradox most people miss. Freedom feels irresponsible at first, because responsibility was defined externally for so long. You were rewarded for compliance, not congruence. So when you act from the self, guilt shows up uninvited. That guilt isn't a moral signal, it's withdrawal from conditioning, like sore muscles after using parts of yourself you forgot existed. The ego panics and calls it danger, but the self recognizes it as expansion. That's why courage feels both terrifying and relieving. You're crossing an invisible border. A useful metaphor here is leaving a well-paved road for a trail. The road is safe, approved and predictable. The trail is uneven, quiet and yours. No signs, no guarantees, but also no traffic. This is why awakening often comes with loneliness at first. Not because you're wrong, but because you're early. Others may follow later, or not at all. Individuation was never meant to be crowded. It was meant to be honest. If you want something practical, practice conscious disobedience in small ways. Break one internal rule that no longer serves you. Speak one truth you've been rehearsing in silence. Choose meaning over image for one decision this week. Study lives shaped by inner authority. Jung, Viktor Frankl, even quiet figures who chose integrity over approval. Notice how your body responds when you act from alignment. That calm after the storm feeling, that's real. This isn't about rejecting the world, it's about no longer abandoning yourself to fit into it. And once you experience that, something irreversible happens. You can never fully go back to sleep. Did you like this final topic, or would you like any adjustments, tone, depth, pacing, or expansion before we move on? Now comes the part most people avoid, the part where insight becomes action. Because understanding the mask is powerful, but removing it changes things. So ask yourself, honestly, where are you still performing instead of living? Which truths have you been postponing because they might disrupt comfort, image, or approval? You don't need to transform your whole life overnight, but you do need to stop betraying yourself in small daily ways. Pay attention to your body. It already knows when something isn't aligned. Notice when exhaustion shows up, when resentment leaks, when numbness settles in. Those aren't flaws, they're invitations. Invitations to choose authenticity over conformity, meaning over applause, truth over performance. Here's the provocation I'll leave you with. If nothing changes after this video, then the mask wins. But if even one choice shifts, one boundary, one honest sentence, one act of self-respect, you begin a different life. A quieter one maybe, but a truer one. So tell me in the comments, what part of yourself have you been hiding the longest? And what would change if you stopped? If this message resonated with you, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and activate notifications. This channel exists for people who are done pretending and ready to remember who they really are. Stay close. This journey has only begun.